So, Drea, maybe you should take the lead on this. It is your story. Maybe we should throw to the video because this is new news for me, folks. You can say the truth and you'll be branded a racist. Unbelievable. Let's check out the story of MLA Dallas Brody.
I have publicly stated that the number of confirmed burials at the former residential school in Kamloops is 0. This is the truth. A fact that the Kamloops Band itself also admits, and a fact that the Chief Justice of British Columbia has also confirmed in the case of Regina and Dirk last year. As a lawyer and an arbitrator for over 30 years, I have relied on facts my whole professional life. However, the First Nations Leadership Council, one of the most powerful lobby groups in British Columbia, is now calling for me to be imprisoned on the basis of that factual statement. Imprisoned.
Question, member.
Mr. Speaker, will the Premier defund the First Nations Leadership Council and denounce every group that is advocating to criminalize the true statements of Canadian citizens?
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say, I think on behalf of most members in this House that I very much regret that that's a question that member. Just the other day, we screened the movie Sugarcane, and we got to see a little bit of the history of what residential school survivors have faced in this province, in this country. We got to see the pain, but most of all, what we got to see was their search for the truth. For us, with a very simple request to us, support them, help them, tell their stories and uncover the truth of what happened at residential school. And we all need to do that, Mr. Speaker. This member has been speaking very vocally in a very damaging way to survivors, and I want to speak directly to survivors right now. We believe you. We are there for you. We will support you in understanding what happened and being there to make sure we all understand the truth of what happened at residential school. Mr. Speaker, I was a lawyer for many years on the front lines with survivors and their claims going forward, and I saw how hard it was for them to get their stories believed and heard through the justice system. This member has repeatedly called upon us to deny the course that the Law Society is teaching lawyers. That is an important thing for us to uphold in this House. I know that the members across the way and a lot of us in this House support me in condemning that question and standing by survivors, and I hope we would all stand to do that.
Member has supplemental.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I can go toe-to-toe with any lawyer. I did work with Aboriginal children for 7 years as a young offender defense attorney, perhaps even spent more time doing that work than any of you. Mr. Speaker, my questions are not about feelings, they are about facts. Does the Premier have a list of facts that British Columbians must not speak lest they be put in jail? Or should I request that list from his good friends at the First Nations Leadership Council?
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I won't repeat what I said, but I will say I would hope that that member would use their power and privilege of sitting in this House to support survivors and help find the truth instead of what's happening right now.
So, Drea,
There,
it seems to me we've reached a new odious benchmark in terms of political correctness and wokeness, and that
oh,
is if the truth hurts, one dare not speak it, which is actually the very definition of political correctness. Drea, you've covered the story very well. What's really going on here?
literally, there is so much to unpack. I'll start with saying, boy, did they mess with the wrong politician with Dallas Brody. If those of you don't know the background of what happened, maybe you're not in British Columbia or what have you, but our Conservative Party of British Columbia, Dallas Brody was serving as the critic to the Attorney General, who you just saw Nikki Sharma respond. She was serving there. And in that duty of being the critic to the Attorney General, she spoke out about how there is a lawsuit from lawyers who are being, one in particular, Jim Heller, who's been smeared as a residential school denier for simply wanting the accurate phrasing in the mandatory training for lawyers in British Columbia that is still claiming that 215 children's remains were discovered at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, something we debunked, in our documentary 3 years ago and questioned immediately in my first report from the grounds there about how that was even possible to say with GPR. And so in that capacity, she called it out. And she got these calls to be let go. And unfortunately, if you look up my report, what happened to John Rustad, who's the leader of that party, and why did he lie about Dallas Brody, you'll see that he caved. He caved to the identity politics, kicked her out, and then two MLAs, the couple of claps behind her followed. Now, what is so scary about this is she is pointing out that there are calls to criminalize the accurate speech that she did, which is just say that there have been zero bodies. And, why is the Law Society avoiding that? That calls to criminalize that type of speech, including my reports, is not anything new, but now it's going straight to elected officials, which we've saw in Quesnel, BC too. So it's a very serious thing. And then you have the Attorney General, who admittedly was a lawyer for many years, wanting residential school disinformation to continue to the lawyers. She twists the reality to the public and claims that MLA Dallas Brody is calling for the whole course to be, gone entirely. No, they are calling for the truth to be had. But something that should be said is out of the 12 hours of mandatory, training that you need to keep up your license or whatever you would call it as a lawyer, 50% of that is focused on Indigenous matters. So out of all of the things to do with law, it is disproportional that 50% is mandatory. And when you call out disinformation in that mandatory course, you are smeared as a residential school denier. And there are calls from lobby groups like the First Nation Leadership Council to actually have you criminalized. So I actually have an interview coming up with Miss Dallas Brody that you're not going to want to miss. That's a very good interview. But I also have an exclusive interview with a Kamloops band member coming up because Nikki Sharma, who claims that she's standing for the residential school survivors, is also avoiding the fact that there are people who attended residential schools and have a different take. They don't even consider themselves survivors. So that will be proven as well. And it's not to diminish bad things that happen. Nobody is denying residential schools or that horrible things happen or that it was horrible for the students and families that were taken unwillingly from parents. There are many parents who signed up their children. No one is disputing any of that, but enough is enough. It's time to stand for reality. And if our MLAs are getting kicked out of parties for shedding light on stuff like this, it just shows how serious of an issue this is, let alone the 248 churches that have burnt since that false 2021 claim.
It's terrifying to me in a way because anyone that's in law, you think, Drea, they would subscribe to the whole concept of Madam Justice, the statue with the scales in one hand, the sword in the other, but most importantly, the blindfold, that everything is judged on its own merits. It's all about evidence. It's not about feelings. And this idea that they're going after her to criminalize factual statements. It just brings to mind, near the ending of 1984, when Winston Smith is at the Ministry of Love, which is the last place you want to be because it's actually the torture chamber, and he's being interrogated, and it's, how many fingers, Winston? And he says 3 because it is 3, and he's tortured because the answer they want is 4. And then when he says 4, he's tortured again because, you see, Winston, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4, and sometimes it's 5. It's like the truth is fluid. And this is what we're seeing here. This is a woman calling out a hoax. There are, the Chief Justice has called it out. Band members have called it out. And yet she is supposed to censor herself and go along with this lie? That's incredible to me.
Well, and let's not forget the millions upon millions of tax dollars that have gone out to the Kamloops band with the intention for them to properly investigate, including excavation, which they did not do. And the bands that, we heard, we have unmarked graves, we have unmarked graves, we have unmarked graves. Not a single body has ever been discovered, except for the bands that said, rightfully so, we have a graveyard here, and there's a mix of people that were buried there, and it was marked. But over time, the wooden crosses broke down, and we'd like some money about that. Anybody who had sort of a nefarious claim, 0 bodies. And out of the 14 or so who have excavated, they don't say nothing. There's a few articles. Nobody makes a big deal out of these huge falsehoods that our Attorney General, Nikki Sharma, wants to just be taken as fact without evidence. And it's a full circle moment. So we've talked about how the BC Conservatives kicked out Dallas Brody after the backlash for this. But in previous reports, I've explained how much of, or a significant part of the rise to that party has to do with Aaron Gunn. He's a documentarian who was running for leadership with the BC Liberals, which was led by Kevin Falcon, now called BC United. And when he was running for that, he was canceled out of that party for so-called, going against the politically correct narrative of residential schools. So John Rosted knows that history because after that, Aaron Gunn was very influential in helping that party, get to where it is, and other people as well. And he did not stand for the truth with Dallas Brody. And now look what's happening. I've covered many people, professionals, who are getting canceled this way. Even a Supreme Court judge was called a residential school denier. But now we have Aaron Gunn from North Island, a very promising candidate who's running again for politics, as he should. He's got a knack for it, for the federal conservative parties. And the same groups, calling to go after MLA Dallas Brody are now coming for him for a 2020 tweet that he did. So you can see this article with Czech News. They're calling for him to come down. If you scroll down a little bit, I think the actual 2020 tweet is in there. But essentially, he says something along the lines of, he refutes in 2020 that it was a genocide, that the residential school system was a genocide. Now, remember what genocide actually means. Remember that so far these unmarked grave claims are not actually manifesting hundreds of missing children, which, by the way, that amount was never reported missing from the school. And even in the Truth and Reconciliation report, it does not say genocide. It says cultural genocide. Big difference. But after these false claims came out, or unproven claims, what did our parliament do? Unanimously, the Conservative Party as well, all stood in favor of, calling them, our country now calls this a genocide, without the conclusive evidence of such. Much of it is oral testimonies, and that's actually paved the way for the UN to get its hands on this situation, which is a whole other story. You can find out all of my reports, or most of them, at kamloopsdocumentary.com, and you can donate to help my investigations on this too, because I don't think Canadians realize how significant of an issue this is and what it's all connected to when it comes to government overreach, because remember, First Nation bands are governments.
Well, if the UN is denouncing it, well, that carries so much weight, doesn't it, Drea? This is the same UN, I take it, that was hiring Hamas employees that were actually trying to engage in a real genocide of the Jewish people. Incredible. Before we move on from this subject, one last thing, because it should be noted. When Miss Sharma was criticizing Miss Brody, and her body of evidence to justify that there was a mass grave there, she mentioned the documentary Sugarcane. Drea, what do we know about Sugarcane?
Well, I have to give credits to Michelle. And again, you can find information about this at our website. Michelle Sterling, you can look up her on X. She did a great job. Again, just wanting the full story to be told. And she points out much of the misinformation in that documentary. So Michelle Sterling is her name. You can find her on X and you will very easily, she's got a couple of articles about it where it really just, again, points out the truth. Things are just being said with no evidence. Things are contradicting evidence that we have in historical documents. And yet you have our legislator screening it as though it's fact to all of the political leaders inside of the actual legislator. They are screening residential disinformation. And that's not to say that everything isn't true. And one other thing we should quickly say is that Aaron Gunn has responded, of course, to the second go around of trying to smear him as a racist. He's certainly not a racist. And he points out all of the things that he has done, all of the times that he has, spoken out against bad things that happened in the residential school and who he's sort of interviewed about these things in his documentaries. So again, it's just a trumped up situation to try to get out a strong candidate, but they keep using this same narrative about anybody who says anything true about residential schools. Scratch that. Anybody who says anything like Mark Carney's father,
Yes,
who, if you pull up my article there, was the principal at an Indian day school in the Northwest Territories, a well-respected historian who documented the good things about residential school from firsthand experience. And he also talked about some bad stuff that happened too. But yet nobody with people, the Quesnel, BC mayor had protest calls and was censured because his wife handed out a book that had unpopular truths on residential schools.
Holy
a mayor,
smokes.
an elected official. Yet no one from the mainstream media or these cancel culture mobsters with the First Nation Leadership Council are calling Mark Carney even the descendant of a so-called residential school denier. It is such a bias. And so we have to stop falling for these tactics of racism or residential school denialism to try to censor truth and to try to further political advantages.
Drea, hypothetical question for you. If it were Pierre Poilievre's father that was tied to an Indian day school, what kind of coverage are we seeing? Is it still on the front page today, perhaps?
No, of course. They would not stop talking about this. And the fact that they are not talking about that, my article talks about how he's perhaps avoiding Indigenous media. They've done a couple of articles on it, but even they're not drawing the connection. They're just saying favorable things. So it's ridiculous.
Want to stay on top of the latest current events, but don't trust the mainstream media to help you do that? Then check out our daily live stream coverage of the latest news and totally unscripted at rebelnews.com/roundup.